Welcome back. The 22nd of September marked World Rhino Day. In South Africa, about 7,900 rhinos have been poached for their horns since 2008. Rhino horns are in high demand primarily in Asia, where it's believed the keratin item has aphrodisiac qualities. The Endangered Wildlife Trust says it's important to remind people about the dangers of poaching, as rhino has become an endangered creature. For more on this conversation, we're now joined by Black Rhino Range Expansion Project Leader, Dr. Jacques Flamand. Doctor, thank you so much for your time this evening and for joining us. Now, Doctor, the rhino obviously remains a very vulnerable species in the world, and most especially in South Africa. What would you say, or who would you say is the biggest contributor within the food chain of where we're seeing a lot of the poaching going on that's really putting the rhinos at such risk?
Well, I mean, the poaching is driven obviously by demand in the Far East, mostly for medicinal purposes. We know that there's very little scientific evidence that it works, so it's based entirely on superstition and tradition. But you know, greed is what's driving this trade, illegal trade, and we must, on the ground, try and do everything we can to prevent that. And of course, that costs a lot of money. It demands a lot of resources to protect rhinos. And of course, there are programs like the Black Rhino Range Expansion Project that I started 20 years ago that tries to get black rhino at least to breed faster.
Speaking about the efforts that we need to put in, Doc, in terms of us ensuring that the poaching is lessened, this year has seen a slight decline in compared to last year this time. What do you think was the biggest contributor to the lessening of the poaching this year?
Well, I don't think there has been a lessening of poaching. You know, we lost 280 last year in KwaZulu Natal. And at mid-year, we were at 140. So it's probably because the figures that you have are not for the whole year, as the whole year isn't complete yet. But no, we are under tremendous pressure from poaching. And, you know, we cannot say that it's declined. It's declined in some places, certainly in Kruger, where they've dehorned. But it's not a general statement. That's correct.
And what would you then say are some of the best practices that other countries like Zimbabwe and Kenya that are possibly using that we as South Africa could learn from in order for us then to be able to lessen the poaching of rhinos?
I can't really comment on what Zimbabwe and Namibia do. I know that their numbers are increasing as well. Ours are also increasing, by the way. But they are also suffering from poaching losses. I believe Namibia lost quite a few. So I think we're all under pressure. And let's face it, there's nowhere that's safe for rhinos generally.
And, Doc, would you say we are seeing more of the poaching in government reserves? Obviously, because there's a larger landscape that they're dealing with. Are we seeing private and public partnerships that are taking place between private reserves and government reserves in ensuring that we work together in saving the rhino?
There is tremendous cooperation between the state and private landowners and rhino owners. You know, certainly at the strategic level and anti-poaching resources and information. I think yes, you're quite correct that the state reserves are very much more difficult to protect because they're much larger, and private and community-owned reserves are generally smaller and therefore easier perhaps to protect. But the other big factor that has prevented private reserves from being poached quite as much is that many of them have dehorned their rhinos, so that's less attractive to poachers. And of course, the poachers are deflected to reserves where there are horned rhinos.
And just in the interest of the viewer, Doc, for those that have dehorned their rhinos, does that change the quality of life of the rhino?
It certainly has not manifested itself in a major way. The rhinos are still breeding as we wanted them to. There are indications that the behavior and social relations do change among the members of a population in terms of the home range size and things like that. but it doesn't affect them very much negatively, not really.
You mentioned earlier on that the Black Rhino project is celebrating 20 years of raising the rhino. Can you just take us through some of the highlights of the work that you've done over the last 20 years?
Okay, in 2004, we released our first black rhino population. What we are doing is removing black rhino from existing populations, mostly in the state sector reserves, and placing them on willing landowners who are prepared to create large areas with their neighbors by dropping fences with them. And we introduce black rhino, we're talking about black rhino only, and introduce about 20 a year onto these new blocks of land provided by private and community landowners. And it is the responsibility of those landowners to look after the rhinos for the state, and then the progeny are shared equally between the landowners and the state. So it's a win-win. Everybody gets more rhinos, and in this way, we've managed to get our black rhino to increase considerably on our project sites. You know, we've moved 230 black rhino, and we're now at 330. So we have had good success, considering, you know, you get natural mortality as well during those 20 years. So we have had a major boost in the numbers of black rhino in this country.
Lastly, Doc, in terms of the educating of our society when it comes to rhinos and the conservation around rhinos, and also when it comes to reporting those that could be involved in syndicates of poaching, how much more education do you believe we need to do as a country to conscientize communities with regards to saving the rhino?
Well, I think one of the important factors is to try and make communities stakeholders in conservation, and that's one of the things we are trying to do with our black rhino range expansion project, to make some communities owners of black rhino as well, so that they have a stake in it. It's a difficult thing. It requires education, because most communities don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to protect rhinos, so we have to help them, and the NGO community has been very instrumental in helping those communities that are involved in this conservation venture. But otherwise, yes, educating people. I mean, there's always a risk that people get tired of hearing about rhino poaching and the plight of rhinos, but we can't let up, and huge resources are required, you know, in terms of funding for anti-poaching activities and protecting areas.
And how much funding, Doc, goes into that? I mean, you also mentioned earlier on that it does require a lot of money to ensure that we are saving our rhinos. How much exactly are we looking at?
Well, there's so many facets of rhino conservation. I mean, you know, if we're talking about protecting areas, I can't remember offhand the figure, but it's huge. You know, my budget to move black rhino populations, we try to do one a year, is like 2 million rand a year. But you know, that's why these partnerships with landowners are so important, to try and distribute or spread the burden of financing. I can't give you exact figures, I'm afraid. I just don't have those.
Doc, thank you so much for your time this evening. We sure know that the rhino is a species that we'd love to stay with us for many more generations to come. So it's work such as that of your organization that we really do appreciate in ensuring that we save our rhinos. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.